At Thanksgiving, the air in the rented glass-walled lake house was stifling, and not just from the heat of the oven. My son-in-law, Andrew, sat at the head of the table, swirling his wine like a king surveying his subjects. He looked down the long table at me, his eyes gleaming with that specific cruelty he saved for holidays. "So, Catherine," he sneered, loud enough for the neighbors to hear, "when will you get a real job?" The table went silent. My daughter Jessica looked down at her plate. Everyone nodded except me. I didn't flinch. I just smiled and said, "Right after I fire you from yours." The moment I said those words, his fork dropped. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. Andrew laughed. It was a sharp, barking sound that didn't quite reach his eyes. He looked around the table, desperate for an audience, desperate for someone to validate that this was just a joke. "Okay, Mom," he said, wiping his mouth with a napkin that cost more than my weekly grocery budget. "Good one. You almost had me there. For a second, I thought you were actually having a..." He tapped his temple, signaling to the room that Grandma had finally lost her marbles. A senior moment. My daughter Jessica let out a nervous, high-pitched giggle. "Mom, really?" she whispered, her eyes darting between her husband and me. "Let's not do this today. Just eat your turkey." My fork remained untouched on the table. Jessica's plea went unanswered. My focus was entirely on Andrew. Blinking would have been a concession, and I wasn't in a negotiating mood. I just sat there, in my simple cotton dress, occupying space with a weight that had nothing to do with mass and everything to do with leverage. There is a specific kind of silence that happens in a boardroom right before a hostile takeover. It is heavy. It sucks the oxygen out of the room. I let that silence expand, filling the space between the crystal wine glasses and the centerpiece. I watched Andrew's smile falter. The corner of his mouth twitched. He was waiting for me to back down, to clarify, to apologize for the outburst. He was waiting for the status quo to return, where he was the alpha and I was the charity case. But I remained motionless. In my 40 years of building businesses, I have learned a fundamental truth about power. True wealth whispers. Only debt needs to scream to be heard. Andrew had been screaming for years. The least luxury car in the driveway, the oversized watch that kept getting caught on his cuff, the constant bragging about bonuses that hadn't cleared yet, it was all noise. It was the desperate, frantic noise of a man trying to convince the world he was valuable because he was terrified he wasn't. Looking at him, I didn't see a successful executive. I saw a distressed asset. I saw a balance sheet bleeding red ink. I saw a man who had leveraged his entire identity on things he didn't own, trying to impress people he didn't like. It's the Dunning-Kruger effect of finance. The less solvent you are, the louder you have to bark to keep the creditors and your own insecurities at bay. "Mom?" Jessica's voice was sharper now. "You're staring." "I'm not staring," I said, my voice dropping an octave, stripping away the grandmotherly warmth they were used to. "I'm evaluating." Andrew shifted in his chair. The leather creaked loudly in the quiet room. "Evaluating what?" he asked, his voice losing that slick, condescending edge. He sounded younger now, uncertain. "The asset," I said calmly. "And the liability." He frowned, confusion warring with irritation. He poured himself more wine, his hand shaking just enough to clink the bottle against the glass. That was the tell. The sweat was starting to bead at his hairline. He knew, deep down in that lizard brain that senses danger, that the dynamic had shifted. He just didn't know how or why. He looked at my clothes, faded, practical, unbranded, and tried to reconcile the image of his broke mother-in-law with the predator sitting across from him. He couldn't do it. His arrogance wouldn't let him. "Look, Catherine," he said, trying to regain his footing, leaning forward to physically loom over the table. I know holidays are stressful. Maybe you're tired, but let's not pretend you have any idea what my job entails. You haven't worked in, 20 years? The business world has changed. Has it? I asked. I picked up my glass of water and took a slow, deliberate sip. Math hasn't changed, Andrew. Profit and loss haven't changed. And the consequence of incompetence, that certainly hasn't changed. The air in the room got thinner. My grandson, Austin, lowered his phone. For the first time all day, the screen went dark. He was looking at me, really looking at me, with a mixture of fear and fascination. Andrew slammed his hand down on the table. Not hard enough to break anything, but hard enough to make the silverware jump. Enough, he snapped. I put this roof over your head for the weekend. I paid for this food. I will not be lectured on competence by a woman whose biggest financial decision this decade was choosing between cat food brands. He thought that was the winning blow. He thought reminding me of my poverty would put me back in my box. I just checked the time on my old scratched wristwatch. 11:55. 5 minutes until the market update notifications would start hitting phones. You're right, Andrew, I said softly. You paid for the food. Enjoy it. It's the last meal you'll eat as a free man. I took a slow breath, letting the silence settle in the room like dust. From my seat at the far end of the table, I could feel the cold draft creeping in from the kitchen door. It's the seat. They always give me the spare seat. The one reserved for the least important guest. The one where you have to crane your neck to hear the conversation at the head of the table. For years, they thought they were putting me here to punish me. They thought that by shoving me to the periphery, they were making me small. They were wrong. There is a specific strategic advantage to sitting at the edge of the boardroom or the dinner table. When you are in the center, you are performing. When you are at the edge, you are observing. And for the last decade, I have seen everything. My eyes traced the length of the oak table. It was set with rented china and arranged with flowers that would be dead by tomorrow. I studied Jessica, nervously twisting a diamond ring that I knew was financed on a 24% interest credit card. Then there was Andrew, sweating in a bespoke suit that cost more than my first car, terrified that the world would find out he was drowning in leverage. They looked at me and saw a woman in a 10-year-old cotton dress driving a vintage Mercedes because she couldn't afford a new lease. They saw failure. I looked at them and saw bad investment. See, there is a letter I have always wanted to write to everyone who has ever been forced to sit at the drafted end of the table. To the black sheep, the poor relations, the ones who don't fit the family brand, it would be a short letter. It would say, do not envy them. Do not wish for their seat. The view is better from here. Because from here, you see the cracks in the foundation. I took another sip of water, my eyes tracing the lines of stress around Andrew's mouth. He didn't know that I was the one who anonymously bought the debt from his failed startup 4 years ago just to keep Jessica from losing her house. He didn't know that the angel investor group that funded his current company's seed round was just a shell corporation I managed from my laptop on Sunday mornings. I had been the silent partner in their entire lives. I was the safety net they spat on because they couldn't see the strings. It wasn't charity. It was a maternal hedge. I wanted to ensure my daughter had security, even if she chose a husband who treated finances like a casino. But every investment has a maturity date. Every silent partner eventually calls for an audit. You're quiet, Catherine, Andrew said, his voice tight, trying to reclaim the air in the room. Thinking about your next consulting gig? Or just wondering how you're going to pay for gas to get home? He was baiting me. He wanted the old Catherine, the one who would apologize, who would shrink, who would offer to do the dishes to earn her keep. I set my glass down. The sound of the crystal hitting the wood was deliberate. I'm not thinking about gas, Andrew. I said, my voice smooth and level. I'm thinking about the $300,000 you transferred out of the company operating account last Tuesday. The transaction marked vendor payment to a shell company in the Caymans. The color drained from his face so fast, it looked like a magic trick. I'm thinking, I continued, leaning forward just an inch, that you should have checked who owns the shell company before you tried to wash your bonus. Andrew didn't flinch at the accusation. He didn't stutter. He did something far more dangerous. He sighed. It was a long, pitying exhalation, the kind a parent gives a toddler who has just spilled juice on a white carpet. He looked at Jessica, then back at me, shaking his head with a practiced sorrow. Okay, he said, his voice dropping to a hush. Okay, I think I see what's happening here. Jessica, honey, we talked about this. Jessica looked down at her plate, her knuckles white as she gripped her fork. She wouldn't meet my eyes. Mom, she whispered, please. It's the confusion, Andrew said, addressing the table like he was holding a medical seminar. Paranoia, delusions of grandeur, thinking she has access to corporate accounts, thinking she's spying on us. He turned to me, his face arranging itself into a mask of deep, fake concern. Catherine, nobody is moving money to the Caymans. You're imagining things. It's a symptom. He was gaslighting me, and he was good at it. If I hadn't been the one who signed the audit request that flagged the transfer 3 days ago, I might have even believed him. I'm not imagining the Swift code, Andrew, I said coolly. Stop it, Jessica snapped, her voice cracking. Just stop it, Mom. You're ruining everything. She can't help it, Jess, Andrew said, reaching over to pat her hand. It's the progression. We knew this was coming. He took a sip of wine, his confidence fully restored. He had found his angle. He wasn't a fraudster being exposed. He was a saintly son-in-law dealing with a senile elder. He leaned back, unbuttoning his suit jacket. Actually, Catherine, this outburst, it clarifies things. Jessica and I have been having some hard conversations about your living situation. The room went still again, but this time the silence wasn't electric. It was suffocating. We've been looking at the budget, Andrew continued, his eyes hard and flat. And frankly, supporting you isn't sustainable. Not with the baby starting private school next year. We can't keep carrying you. Carrying me. The woman who paid off their credit cards in 2019. The woman who secretly funded the down payment on their first house. So, he said, we found a place. Shady Pines, or whatever it's called. It's state funded. Basic, sure, you'll have a roommate. But it's safe. And frankly, it's all we can afford for you. He paused for effect, letting the cruelty sink in. We're moving up the timeline, he added. Monday. We'll pack up your apartment. You don't need all that junk anyway. I looked at my grandson, Austin. He was 15, the age where boys usually only care about video games and avoiding eye contact. But he wasn't looking at his phone. He was staring at his father with an expression I recognized. It wasn't anger. It was shame. He was watching his father bully an old woman, and for the first time, he was seeing the man behind the Rolex. Andrew thought he was displaying strength. He was actually displaying rot. You're putting me in a state home, I repeated, keeping my voice neutral, to save money. It's for your own good, Andrew said, cutting into his turkey. You need supervision. Clearly, I didn't feel hurt. I didn't feel betrayed. Those emotions belong to families, and as far as I was concerned, this man was no longer family. He was a bad investment that needed to be liquidated. I see, I said. Monday. Andrew confirmed, chewing with his mouth slightly open. So let's just have a nice dinner, okay? No more stories about secret bank accounts. I picked up my napkin and dabbed the corners of my mouth. I folded it neatly into a square and placed it beside my plate. It was a signal I used to give in board meetings. It meant the negotiation is over. The execution begins. You're right, Andrew, I said, pushing my chair back. We shouldn't talk about secret accounts. We should talk about public ones. I placed my fork down, I picked up my linen napkin and wiped my mouth once firmly. Then I folded the napkin into a perfect square and set it beside my plate. In my world, in the boardroom on the 45th floor of the Chen Global building, this gesture has a specific meaning. My board of directors knows it well. It signals that the social portion of the meeting is concluded. It means we are done exchanging pleasantries and are now moving to the execution phase. Andrew, I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it had lost the soft, rounded edges of a grandmother. It was now the flat, metallic tone of a chairman addressing a junior executive. Sit down. He had started to rise, perhaps to usher me out, but the command froze him. He looked at me, blinking, trying to process the sudden shift in gravity. I turned to my grandson. Austin. The boy looked up, startled. Unlock your phone, I instructed. Open your trading app. I know you have one. I saw you checking crypto prices during the appetizer. Mom, don't bother him, Jessica started. But Austin was already moving. He was intrigued. He sensed the energy shift, the way a dog senses a storm before the thunder rolls. Got it, Austin said, his thumb hovering over the screen. Search for ticker symbol CGV, I said. Chen Global Ventures. Andrew let out a snort of derision. Chen Global? Catherine, please, that's a multinational holding company. What are you doing? Pretending you bought a few shares with your social security check? Read the market cap. Austin, I said, ignoring Andrew entirely. Austin's eyes widened as the numbers loaded. He squinted, thinking he misread the decimal point. 4.8 billion, he stammered. Grandma, it says 4.8 billion. Correct, I said. Now, Austin, scroll down to the recent newses tab. Read the headline from this morning's press release. The room was so quiet you could hear the hum of the refrigerator. Austin swallowed hard. Chen Global Ventures completes hostile acquisition of Apex Dynamics. Andrew's wine glass shattered. He hadn't thrown it. His hand had just gone numb. The glass slipped from his fingers, hitting the edge of his plate and exploding into a starburst of red wine and crystal shards. Red liquid dripped onto the white tablecloth, spreading like a gunshot wound. That's a lie, Andrew whispered. His face was gray. Apex is being bought by a private equity firm. The board told us. I am the private equity firm, I interrupted. I operate through 3 layers of shell companies because I prefer anonymity. But make no mistake, as of 9 o'clock this morning, I am the majority shareholder. I am the chairman of the board. And I am the one reviewing your department's redundancy files. I leaned back, resting my hands on the table. You see, Andrew, this is the mistake people like you always make. You confuse visibility with value. You think success is the part of the iceberg you can see, the part that sparkles in the sun. The cars, the watches, the noise. I gestured to the glass walls of the rental house, the symbol of his fragile, leased life. You spent your life polishing the 10% above the water. I spent 40 years building the 90% beneath it. The dangerous part, the part that sinks ships that aren't careful. I looked him dead in the eye. You called my consulting business little. It wasn't little. It was just submerged. And you just steered your entire career straight into it. Andrew stared at me, his face going through a rapid cycle of emotions. Shock, denial, and finally a desperate, cornered anger. He stood up, knocking his chair back against the wall. The sound was violent, but I didn't flinch. I just watched him, the way a scientist watches a specimen under a microscope. You can't fire me, he spat, his voice trembling with a mix of rage and terror. I have a contract. I have a golden parachute clause. If you terminate me without cause, you owe me 2 years' salary plus stock options. You think you can just walk in here and play God because you bought some shares? I'll sue you for wrongful termination. I'll drag you and your little shell companies through court for years. He looked around the room, seeking validation. Did you hear that? She's threatening me. This is harassment. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Sit down, Andrew. No, he shouted, pointing a shaking finger at me. You don't tell me what to do in my house. You're bluffing. You're trying to scare me. You can't touch me without cause. I have cause, I said quietly. Incompetence isn't cause, he yelled. I hit my targets. I got my bonus. Yes, I agreed. You did get your bonus. $250,000, which you immediately used to put a deposit on a vacation home in Aspen. A bold move for a man with 3 maxed out credit cards. He froze. But here is the problem with that bonus, Andrew. I continued, smoothing the tablecloth with my hand. You didn't earn it. I picked up my phone and tapped the screen once. Check your email. What? Check your email. He pulled his phone out of his pocket. His hands were shaking so badly he almost dropped it. He tapped the screen. The notification ping was loud and sharp in the silent room. That is a preliminary report from the forensic accounting team I sent into Apex Dynamics on Monday, I explained. They've been going through your department's books for the last 72 hours. Andrew's eyes scanned the document. I watched the blood drain from his face until he looked like a ghost. When we looked at the Q3 revenue numbers, you reported the numbers that triggered your bonus. We noticed something interesting. You booked revenue for 3 major contracts that haven't been signed yet. You inflated the projections to hit your threshold, collected the cash, and hoped you could close the deals before the audit at the end of the year. Jessica gasped. Andrew? What is she talking about? He didn't answer. He couldn't speak. He was reading the section of the PDF that outlined the potential legal consequences. That's not just bad management, Andrew, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that carried more weight than a scream. That is corporate fraud. That is embezzlement. And under the terms of your employment contract, Section 12, Paragraph 4, to be exact, it is grounds for immediate termination with 0 severance. I took a sip of water and I added, it is also grounds for criminal prosecution. He looked up at me then. The arrogance was gone. The king of the castle was gone. All that was left was a terrified little boy realizing he had broken something he couldn't fix. You wouldn't, he stammered. I'm family. Family? I repeated the word, tasting it. Family is the people you protect. You were planning to put me in a state facility to save $4,000 a month. You were planning to erase me. I stood up. I'm not filing charges yet, I said. But the SEC usually takes a dim view of insider trading and revenue manipulation. Whether they find out depends entirely on what you do in the next 5 minutes. Andrew looked at the timer on my phone. He looked at Jessica, who was weeping silently into her napkin. Then he looked at the ceiling, as if hoping for divine intervention. When he looked back at me, the predator was gone. All that was left was prey. Mom, he croaked, his voice cracking. Please, you can't do this. The investigation. If that gets out, I'll be blacklisted. I'll never work in this industry again. Think of the family. Think of your grandchildren. If I lose this job, we lose the house, we lose everything. You lost the house 6 months ago, Andrew, I said, checking my watch. You just haven't admitted it yet. I tapped the screen. Siri, call Robert. No. Andrew lunged across the table, but stopped short of grabbing the phone. Don't! Catherine, I'm begging you! The line connected. Margaret? Happy Thanksgiving. Hello, Robert, I said, my voice steady. I'm confirming the termination of the VP of Operations at Apex, effective immediately. Authorization code 7 Alpha Zulu. And Robert, forward the forensic audit to the SEC compliance officer. Let them decide how to proceed. Understood, Robert said. Done. I hung up. Andrew slumped back in his chair, breathing hard, his face a mask of ruin. He stared at me with pure, unadulterated hatred. You bee, he whispered. Then he screamed it. You vindictive old bee. Get out! Get out of my house! Right now! Take your old car and your cheap dress and get the hell off my property. I stood up slowly. I picked up my purse from the floor. Actually, Andrew, I said, pulling a folded document from the side pocket about the property. I tossed the paper onto the table. It landed right next to the puddle of spilled wine. I know you've been renting this place for the holidays to show off, I said, but the landlord listed it for sale 3 months ago. You didn't know because you don't read the real estate section. You only read your own press clippings. Andrew stared at the paper. It was a deed of sale. I bought it this morning, I said. Cash offer. 30-day closing, but immediate occupancy rights were transferred at noon. I smoothed my dress. So technically, I said, looking around the room with a critical eye, you are screaming at your landlord. And since you just threatened me, I'm exercising the immediate eviction clause for tenant misconduct. You have 1 hour to vacate. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a kingdom collapsing. Turning to my grandson, I noticed he was still holding his phone, looking from his father to me. Austin, I said, I'm leaving. I have a dinner to get to at the downtown office. My employees, my actual team, are waiting. We're celebrating a very successful acquisition. I paused. If you want to learn how to build things instead of just pretending to own them, there's a seat in the car for you. If not, good luck with the eviction. Austin didn't hesitate. He stood up, grabbed his jacket, and walked around the table. He didn't look at his father. He stood next to me. I looked at Jessica one last time. She was still crying, unable to move, paralyzed by the husband she had chosen. I left the deed in your name, Jessica, I said softly. It's a trust asset. He can't touch it. But you have to decide if you want to live in a house owned by your mother or build a life of your own. The front door opened to cool autumn air, feeling like freedom on my face. I walked to my vintage Mercedes, the one Andrew had mocked for 5 years. Opening the heavy door, I slid into the leather seat. Austin got in the passenger side. He buckled his seatbelt, looking straight ahead. Where to, Grandma? He asked. To the office, I said, starting the engine. It purred like a lion. And Austin, call me chairman. As we pulled out of the driveway, leaving the shouting and the chaos in the rearview mirror, guilt didn't register. Sadness was an overhead cost I just eliminated. I felt lighter. Sometimes you have to prune the dead branches so the tree can survive. If you've ever had to cut off a toxic family member to save your own peace, tell me your story in the comments. I read every single one. Don't forget to share this if you believe respect is earned, not given.